Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hour 3 of Home Talk Radio. I'm Greg Owens, a.k.a. Made in America Guy, and this is the Made in America Hour. Excited to have with me today Jeff Ferry from the Coalition for Prosperous America. He's the economist and an author of many articles and papers written on subjects involving trade. Jeff, welcome to the hour.
Hi, Greg. Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Before we get started and we talk about trade issues, I think I should mention that this segment is brought to us by Lion Energy Products. You can go anywhere with a portable solar generator. Visit them at lionenergy.com. We have some exciting news coming out of Washington this week regarding the de minimis legislation that we've been talking about on this program, and CPA has done extensive work on over the last 10 years or so. It appears as if the White House is moving forward with what may be an executive order focusing in on eliminating de minimis for shipments covering steel and aluminum. I'm not sure exactly how that really ties into anything under $800, but also for anything subject to the 301 duties, which would really have a wide impact on closing what I would consider to be a loophole in our trade law that allows companies like Temu and Shein to import inexpensive garments. It's been just a wide open tunnel to bring in illicit drugs like fentanyl into the country, and it's gained in support from both Democrats and Republicans over recent years. And now it looks like we might actually get this thing across the finish line. Jeff, what is your take on the current situation?
Well, I would put the odds at this getting across the finish line, frankly, at no better than 50-50. But I agree with you that it is an important step forward because, as you referred to, de minimis has been a huge loophole in our import rules since 2016 when Congress raised the limit to $800. And we estimate that over $150 billion of goods are coming in this way every single year. And Customs and Border Patrol have released their own figures, which are smaller than ours, but are still in the billions of dollars. And they're not counted in our usual import statistics. So our imports are significantly higher than the U.S. government figures would have you believe. And this is a huge loophole, which is really hitting many, many businesses in the U.S., in the apparel business and the small appliance business, businesses like your own, Greg. And it's costing us billions of dollars, thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of jobs. And the vast majority of this is being exploited by Chinese exporters who, as you say, are really beyond the reach of U.S. law. They're able to ship fentanyl and other illicit products into the U.S., and they never get caught. They can't get caught because you can't really prosecute someone in China. And if they do get caught, they simply open up another business in a different name at even the same address. And it's a disastrous situation, frankly.
Right. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the de minimis legislation, Rita and I did an entire hour which explains exactly what it is and how this loophole has been exploited. It amounts to simply being able to take anything that you claim is under $800 and put it in the mail and send it into the United States. And Customs doesn't even generally look at it. There's no record of it. It's pretty crazy. And when we first went down to Capitol Hill and started bringing this up with staffers and members of Congress, they looked at this like they can't believe this is even true. This must it's so ridiculous. It must not even be true. But as it turns out, it is very true. And, one of the things in Washington that's frustrating is sometimes announcements like this are made and they're just made for political purposes. So that's, I think, where you're getting your 50-50 on it. It would be as simple as signing an executive order and doing away with this. It's a little up in the air as to whether the Biden administration is going to kick this back to Congress and try and have them pass legislation at the end of an election year, which is doubtful. We'll see how this all plays out over the next couple of weeks. And if we can get this done, it would be a big victory, like you say, for our company and for many other companies who have suffered in the face of unfair trade legislation for decades.
Would you like to know a little more? Should I talk a little more about the
yeah, I mean, if you have other comments. Yeah, if we have other comments, we're coming up on the end of our first segment here, but go right ahead.
Oh, all right. So I think the problem is this: the Democrats came up with a plan to lock any de minimis imports from China. That was sponsored by Congressman Blumenauer. The Republicans on the Ways and Means Committee said, "Oh, we don't want to support something the Democrats have proposed, so we're going to propose something different." And so the two sides couldn't agree, which happens all the time. We've got a lot of deadlock in Congress. And I think then the next thing that happened was 120 Democratic congressmen signed a public letter to President Biden saying, look, de minimis is terrible. We have to stop it. And so I think the Biden administration was pushed to take some action. But when you say, could anything happen before November? I mean, I think the Biden administration's intention is that nothing happened before November. But the Biden administration wants to help Kamala Harris in her presidential campaign. So getting this thing out there as a matter of public record makes it look like she's tough on China. The Republicans have their own version of this, which is a different version. But, if we had a truly well-functioning Congress, the two sides would have got together in the summer and hammered out a compromise. So, we might get somewhere in January with a new administration on this. I hope we do. But, I wouldn't bet a lot of money on it, unfortunately. And the reason is that companies like Federal Express, the companies that make money from shipping, have a lot of influence in our political environment.
Yeah, there are several opponents to doing anything about this that have really been dominating the conversation on Capitol Hill for many years. In fact, there was a coalition of them when we first started hawking this issue that was out there, and it was made up of DHL and Federal Express and UPS and all the shippers who are literally making billions of dollars off of shipping these contents. At the beginning, Amazon was vehemently opposed to this, but now that companies like Temu and Shein have come into prominence and are taking a lot of business away from Amazon, they seem to have softened their position on it. Do you have any insight into that? Have they softened it, or is it just word speak, or what's going on?
No, I think they've changed their position. I don't have any inside information. I don't speak to anybody at Amazon anymore. I did when I was in the tech industry, but not now. But I think that, Amazon has a huge, very effective set of warehouses in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. And when they see Shein and Temu taking market share by shipping, as you say, mainly through U.S. mail or through FedEx or UPS, direct from Shanghai, they say, well, let's make things tough for those guys. And if they want to invest in a network of warehouses like we've got, good luck to them. So, so there's a lot of different angles in a battle, as in so many battles in Washington. And,
right.
Amazon's no friend of domestic producers like you, but let's hope that they're evolving, because Amazon has evolved over the years.
Well, it's going to be really interesting to see how this thing plays out, because really what this amounts to is enforcing what everybody thought was existing law, particularly with the 301 duties coming down. And this de minimis loophole has been exploited to the extent that when those duties went in against our products, we really didn't notice any change in the marketplace. And it was simply because the competitors with bringing in product from China and other countries were exploiting de minimis to circumvent those duties put on by the Trump administration and continued under the Biden administration. Well, we have to take a short break here and pay a couple bills. We'll be right back in a couple of minutes with Jeff Ferry to talk about tariffs and everything that you needed to know or wanted to know, but maybe didn't think you needed to know about tariffs and how they could impact inflation. Welcome back to Home Talk Radio. My name is Greg Owens, host of the Made in America Hour here on Home Talk Radio, and I'm here with Jeff Ferry from the Coalition for Prosperous America. This segment is brought to you by Product Quick Start. Noah McNeely and Product Quick Start has been specializing in meeting prototyping and manufacturing needs for inventors. There is only one company to think of, and that's Pro Quick Start. You can reach them at proquickstart.com. Jeff, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be here.
Why don't we start out? I know we're going to get into talking about the topic, and there's a lot of controversy over whether tariffs are inflationary, whether they're not inflationary. I think we would argue the latter, as we're about to find out. But tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in the Coalition for a Prosperous America, as we all call CPA. They're not economists. It's a pro-manufacturing and ranching and farming business group. But Jeff, welcome, and talk a little bit about your work with CPA and what you've been able to accomplish recently.
Okay, so I'm the chief economist at CPA, and I was an economist for years early in my career, and then I spent about 15 years in the technology industry, most of that time living in Silicon Valley. And it was there that I got more of a hands-on view of how business really works and how you make a business profitable and what it takes to succeed and what it takes to employ people and so on. So when I went back to economics at CPA, I think I have a slightly different perspective from most economists who are very academic in the way they look at things. But, I'm also sort of an academic guy. I mean, I studied economics for 5 years. I still, much to my wife's amazement, read economics books for pleasure. And for a brief time back when I was a grad student, I taught some economics too. So what we've done at CPA is we've looked at how trade impacts the U.S. economy. And basically, I think in a sentence, the summary of my view is that import restriction can and does benefit a national economy, particularly when it's a large economy like the United States. Should I go on and talk about some of the tariff studies we've done recently?
Yeah, I know you just came out with one paper in just the standard thing, and you're working on releasing another one that's a little bit more comprehensive on the impact of different tariff strategies on our economy and employment. So go ahead and talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, well, I guess, one thing I could mention is I'm very proud of the fact that in 2019, we won an award called the Menace Award for a study which showed that 25% tariffs on all imports from China would grow the U.S. economy. I don't even remember, it was a small percent, probably grow the U.S. economy by 3%. But the National Association of Business Economists, the NABE, which is a nationwide organization, I think it's fair to say they were so astounded that myself and a colleague, the two economists, would come out with a study like this because it goes so much against the prevailing wisdom in the economics community that they gave us this award. And when I told my wife that I'd won the Menace Award, she said, "What is that for being a menace to society?"
Well, speaking of prevailing economic theory, you may be aware I have a degree in international business, and I got that degree back in the late 80s when globalization was the direction that was going to save the world. And since then have come to find, like you did, where you go out in the real world and you see how things really work, not so much. So it takes sometimes mainstream economists, mainstream politicians some time to pivot and, turn around the aircraft carrier. But the thought is certainly changing these days, and we're seeing that down in Washington, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the environment has changed an awful lot in the last 8 years. We now have members of both political parties openly talking about tariffs and other measures to restrict imports and to rebuild the domestic manufacturing economy. So let me talk about the study we published this summer and the one we're working on now. So what we did in the summer is we have an economic model of the entire world economy, all trade flows between about 150 countries broken down into 65 sectors. So it's a very thorough model. And we looked at what would happen if the US levied a universal 10% tariff on all imports. And what we found was that GDP grew by 4% and household incomes grew by 6%. And I think it created about 3 million new jobs. And, that's an example of applying our model to data from 2023 and getting economic growth from tariffs. And the next set of studies we're coming out with are bigger and broader, 10-year studies looking at 3 different types of tariffs with retaliation. And our conclusion is that a tariff structure which involves 35% tariffs on all manufactured imports, 15% on all non-manufactured imports, and 0 tariffs on imported minerals leads to the biggest growth of all the scenarios we looked at. And that's with retaliation. And the retaliation we looked at is the exact opposite. In other words, what we've seen in the real world is very pinpoint retaliation, like specifically on bourbon whiskey. Well, that's too trivial a market to even move the needle in our models. So we say, what if the world enacted the exact same tariffs on our exports that we're putting on imports? And that does take away 3 points or so of growth from the economy in our model. But what we find after 10 years, our economy is roughly 12 percentage points larger, and average household income is some 12 percentage points higher than it would be without the tariffs. So, and you get some small amount of inflation on the order of, it peaks at 5% and then runs down to 2%, sort of back to where it was at the beginning. So it's a very strong endorsement of tariffs as a vehicle for economic growth.
Right, and there are also other issues that are critical, national security being one of them that we talked about extensively on this program. But we're going to come back on the next segment and open up the conversation to talk about this idea that tariffs are a tax on the American middle class, that people are going to bear the brunt of it, and that there's no benefit to it. Something that you certainly would not support, and something that I'm going to talk a little bit about our company and how things like this de minimis failure to extend the 301 tariffs have negatively impacted us. This is Greg Owens, and I'm here with Jeff Ferry on the Home Talk Radio, the Made in America Hour. We will be back in just a couple minutes with more exciting things on tariffs. Welcome back to Home Talk USA. This is Greg Owens. This is the Made in America Hour, sponsored by Green Products. Protect your wood from future damage with Cooper Green Wood Preservative, greenproductsco.net. Jeff, welcome back. And as we continue our discussion about tariffs, we've heard a little back and forth between the presidential candidates on the impact that tariffs may have. And Kamala Harris seems to have shifted her position towards, even though the Biden-Harris administration has backed the 301 tariffs and actually increased them in certain areas, she seems to be suggesting, and it may be intuitive on some sort of a level, but when you dig deeper into it, it is exactly the opposite, that tariffs are somehow inflationary over the course of time. How would you respond to that and help our audience gain a more thorough understanding of how tariffs impact inflation in our economy over time?
Okay, so the purpose of a tariff policy is to stimulate domestic production. You levy tariffs to handicap imports coming in. That allows domestic production of goods, whether we're talking about, airplanes or steel or whatever it may be, plastics, auto parts, flatware like your own business. The hampering the imports allows the domestic production to go up. When domestic production goes up, you get more revenue at home, more spending at home, more jobs created. Now, you do get a short-term bump in prices, but the bump in prices is far below what Kamala Harris and many mainstream economists claim. In fact, the most authoritative research has been done by the U.S. International Trade Commission, and they found that the bump in prices is roughly 10% of the headline value of tariffs. In other words, there was a 25% tariff on steel imports. Steel prices in the United States rose by about 2.5%. That's all that the impact was, and it peters out over time. Meanwhile, the increase in steel production, we've had about 15 new steel mills built across the country since 2018, since those first tariffs, and they're employing something like 2,000 or 3,000 more people at higher wage jobs than are paid typically in that region. So it's a very significant economic boost. The price impact falls away over time. So it's a net gain. And the reason it's a net gain is because we have spare capacity in our economy. Remember, we were once the world's #1 manufacturing nation, right? You up there in upstate New York, you guys made more flatware than any other company or country in the world. Today, we've allowed all that to go to imports, but much of the capacity is still there. And even if the machinery is not there, we've got excellent managers like yourself, Greg, who can rebuild the company quickly. So by hamstringing those imports, we get a surge in domestic production. And that's the sort of economic model that we use to measure and estimate what's going on here.
Well, we've talked with Jim Gardner and others on the program about the scale or the volume of manufacturing and how important that is. I'm going to have some folks on that have written a book about competitiveness and tariffs next week on the program. I'll tease that out here in a minute. But one of the things that has killed us as a company is all of the high volume runs have gone overseas. And for those who aren't familiar with factory math, let's just say that a company is producing a 50,000 piece run of forks in our case. So the first step of each process is to set up the machine to run that particular article through. That might be a mold, it might be a die, it might be something that you have to set up. And let's say that takes on an average 20 minutes at a cost of $70 an hour on your shop floor. It's $23, right? So then you run those parts at 1 piece per second, boom, 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 you're cranking them out. So each part costs 2 cents. So your total cost is $23 divided by 50,000 parts, or a fifth of a penny each, plus 2 cents. So it costs 0.0205 per part. Well, now let's downsize our factory because we gave away all of our big production runs and we're a much smaller company now. And our run size goes down to 500 pieces. So step one costs exactly the same. It's 20 minutes to set up that machine at $23. But the parts cost the same to run. It's 2 cents a piece. But if you take that $23 and you divide it by the 500 parts, it becomes 4.6 cents a piece plus 2 cents a piece to bang them out. Now your piece went from 2 cents a piece to 6.5 cents a piece. And that's where the run size kills us. Now, if we can get the tariffs put back in and provide some protection, we'll be able to take our pricing down. Because let's say we could get back to making 5,000 piece runs, and I won't go through all the math because we don't have time for that, but the cost per part goes back down to 2.5 cents a piece. And all of a sudden, we're competitive with China. We just need some breathing room. And the ability to crank our factory back up without all these unfair practices taking place. And then our biggest problem doesn't become trying to cut every penny out of their product that we can. Our biggest problem becomes finding people to staff our factory so that we can increase our volume tenfold. And wouldn't that be a wonderful problem to have?
Yeah, and it's the same sort of math. And when I was in the technology industry and I was at Nortel and we sold $10 billion a year, this is on a much bigger scale, $10 billion of optical networking equipment each year. But the engineers to develop that product cost about $1 billion a year. So you can see that if you can increase the volume of sales, you can cut your price because you're now amortizing your fixed cost of all those engineers over a larger base. And that's what I think Donald Trump was referring to when he said tariffs can even lead to price reductions. So it really varies by industry, and you need to understand how different industries work and what the potential is of each industry to capitalize on the opportunity that the tariffs create, the space that the tariffs create in the domestic market. And, frankly, the problem is politicians haven't been willing to get proactive enough. I mean, Trump made a really great effort in 2018 and 2019, but I would say he didn't follow it through enough. And the Biden administration, with the IRA and with the tax credits to stimulate EV production and renewable energy equipment, also hasn't followed through enough. You need both halves. You need protection from predatory imports, and you need support on it, not so much in your business because you're selling direct to the consumer. But if we've got a multi-stage business, like think of making solar panels and selling them to an installer who sells them to a utility, who then sells the power to a consumer, you need an orchestrated process that allows each step in the chain to invest. And frankly, we're up against competition from China, which does, obviously it's a communist dictatorship. It's not directly comparable, but they are a formidable competitor because A, they subsidize their industries, and B, they provide that orchestration so every step in the supply chain can invest knowing he will have a customer to sell to.
Well, you bring up an interesting point with the steel production in the United States and the new melt capacity, the new rolling capacity being put online as I would call a big time or macroeconomic thing. This is areas where billions of dollars of investment need to take place in order to bring that capacity back. If you want to look at something that's interesting and perhaps sad, just look at a chart of steel production in the world and how much of the steel produced in the world used to be done right here domestically, and how that has almost evaporated in the face of China and you're not competing in a market, you're competing with a government. And if they decide to go out and suck up the entire steel business, well, that's what they're going to do, and that's what they've done. And for many reasons, economics included in them, national security being another big part of that, we need to nip that in the bud. We need to stop being gamed by bad policies, and we need to turn the ship back around and bring production not only of steel, but of the things that are made out of steel back here to the United States. Because if the American steel manufacturers don't have customers to sell their product to, and I doubt we're going to be exporting a lot of steel, then where are we going with all that extra capacity? This is Greg Owens, and this is Hour 3 of Home Talk Radio, the Made in America Hour. I'm here with Jeff Ferry. We're going to take a short break here to pay a couple bills, and we will be back shortly with our final segment. This episode has been brought to you by a Product Quick Start. Noah McNeely and Product Quick Start has been specializing in meeting prototyping and manufacturing needs for inventors. There's only one company to think of, and that's Pro Quick Start. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to Home Talk Radio. I'm Greg Owens, and this is the Made in America Hour. And speaking of Made in America, this segment's brought to you by MadeInAmerica.com and MadeInAmerica.org. In fact, the folks at Made in America, which is .com, which is the place where you can go to buy vetted American-made products. No trickery on the internet. They've vetted them all. They're actually made in the USA. They're holding the 2024 American Manufacturing Summit down in Daytona Beach on October 21st and 22nd. I will be there speaking to the topic Amazon, friend or foe. There's several speakers that are going to be joining me. We've invited the governor, who has said yes, but pending his schedule, Rick Scott, Marco Rubio, among others, to talk about policy and things that are happening. So check out madeinamerica.com. And if you're interested in participating as a manufacturer in the summit, there's a link to the website where you can attend and educate yourself further on issues relating to Made in America. Jeff, welcome back. And as we wrap things up in this hour, my next program, I will have Mark Fastow and Ian Fletcher on to talk about a new book that they're coming out with on industrial policy for the United States. And a lot of what we're talking about, tariffs and this de minimis rule, are they inflationary? They're not inflationary. What impact they have on our economy? In order to turn that ship around, which is an aircraft carrier, right? We need a solid, well thought out industrial policy, including different mechanisms that can be used, like tariffs and quotas, in place to make sure that business is supported and that manufacturing can again have a renaissance here in the United States. Do you have any thoughts on industrial policy and how that might be able to help?
Yes, I'm a big supporter of industrial policy, and I've read a portion of Mark and Ian's book, and I think it's a great book and a great resource. It pulls together the stories of industrial policy over the last few hundred years in a very effective and persuasive way, and shows that what the United States needs today is an industrial policy. And I guess if I were to give you one example, I would say that World War II is probably the best example. You know, if you read the history, in about 1940, I think soon after France and Belgium were overrun by the Nazis, President Roosevelt said, this country needs the capability to build 50,000 airplanes. I think at that time, we built something like 100 airplanes a year. And supposedly one of Hitler's advisors, I can't remember whether it was Himmler or one of the others, laughed and said, the United States, the only thing it produces is Hollywood movie stars. And they told the Fuhrer not to worry. And, you know, this was an enormous endeavor, and the government backed it. And at first, private industry was resistant, but Roosevelt won them over. And basically, the CEO of GM left GM and took a job for $1 a year working for the government to coordinate boosting production of airplanes. And Henry Ford's son took over a plant in Michigan and said, we're going to be building, I don't remember the numbers, 1,000 planes a year here in 2 years. And nobody believed it. But sure enough, by about 1943, we were building 50,000 airplanes a year. And think of all the, steel and aluminum and rubber and God knows what goes into doing that. And that was an example of industrial policy because things had to be coordinated. What I'm very strong on is it was done through the private sector. You can't nationalize things and ask the government to do these things because the government doesn't understand efficiency and profitability and all that stuff. But the private sector does, but you have to give them the right targets. I'll stop there, Greg, and give you a chance to ask.
You know what? Ironically, to your point, we're fighting to get flatware put back into the Berry Amendment, which is another thing that came out of World War II. Actually has its roots back in the American Revolution when the American government realized that we depended on Great Britain for many of the things that we needed in order to wage that war. So, and I was going to say, ironically, the building that we're sitting in was built by Oneida back in the day to manufacture turbine blades for the war effort. So having a solid industrial base is really critical in order to defend ourselves, and more so than defend ourselves, peace through strength. Imagine if other bad actors in the world were sitting there looking at the situation thinking, they don't worry about it. They can't build anything anymore. They don't make anything. Well, we need to reverse that and make that conversation go away. So I hope everybody.
Greg, I would like to add there. When I'm asked about why I support manufacturing, I often say there are three reasons why I support a bigger manufacturing base here in the U.S. The first is national security. I mean, obviously, you're not a secure nation if you depend on your enemies for vital components. And right now, we build fighter jets and nuclear submarines, and there are literally thousands of components in those machines, in those systems that come from China. Hard as it is to believe, the CEO of Raytheon is on the record saying that. So that's the first thing, national security. The second thing is family and community. Numerous commentators have said that if you take away manufacturing jobs, you're destroying the family structure. And you and I have talked about that in the Oneida region, among many other regions. That's a problem. But the third reason is economic growth. I think history shows, and reading Mark and Ian's book will show this too, that countries that have large manufacturing sectors grow their economy quicker. They grow personal incomes more quickly. And that's something I've tried very hard to demonstrate with our studies here at CPA. So those are the three reasons I think a large manufacturing sector is essential.
Well, Jeff, that is an excellent summary and a way to wrap up our hour. I want to thank you for joining us. Hopefully we'll have you back shortly. This has been the Made in America Hour on Home Talk Radio. I'm your host, Greg Owens, a.k.a. the Made in America Guy. We will speak with you again next week. Thank you for listening.